I missed Steven's message.
I just want to put it on the record that Steven suggested that we get me dialed in today, so I showed up an hour and a half ago, ready to be dialed in. I showed up 30 minutes early, and you know what happened? Not that.
I dialed me in.
You didn't.
You didn't die. You fixed you.
We could have.
fair.
We could have dialed me
Yours
in
was
and not had the
broken,
problem.
and you had to fix it for like 25 minutes.
20 minutes, thank you.
22 and a half.
Okay, I'll accept 22 and a half.
We better get a quality episode out of this. That's all.
I don't even know what we're discussing. Like I did not see anything.
I've got stuff that I can complain about.
I know.
Surely
I
other
remember the
people can complain
NTFS
about
discussion.
Yeah, we've got to
that's it.
discuss that we started
I need you
discussing.
to explain to me
try
what
to stop.
NTFS is. Like I know what it is, but like how it's supposed to work because it makes no sense.
Okay, well let me pull up the definition of NTFS. I actually don't remember what that acronym stands for.
You're gonna hit the button first.
It's been hit.
The other button.
Not yet. I gotta pull up this factoid first.
So NTFS is the
Where's your laptop? Why is your laptop
Windows
sitting there?
filing system. So the,
Why?
It
the
stands
files.
for New Technology File
Where's your
System. I did
iPad?
look
Why
it
is your
up.
iPad
Yeah.
not here?
It's in the other room.
I'm not liking
on
it
the
after
charger.
today.
It's
I
what
have my
Windows
phone,
has
that's all
run off of
I
since the
didn't know
90s.
we actually prepped
Okay,
stuff.
I think we've
Last
talked about
time
this.
I
You
looked into things,
talked about
there
this.
wasn't anything prepped besides this NTFS.
It's usually
conversation.
last
2 or
minute
3
prep. You
episodes
should
ago
know this
about
by now.
backwards compatibility and how that is a sin. Like it's just too much is
No.
held back by backwards compatibility. You don't get to change that.
This isn't backwards. There's no backwards compatibility. This has been the Windows filing
You're
system
describing
since the
backwards
90s.
compatibility.
It's never changed. It's never been updated. It's never changed to anything different. It's always been NTFS.
Okay, take a guess of when it was.
Welcome to the NTFS show. I mean Hostility in the Morning. I'm your host, John, joined today by
Nathan.
Matthew.
Steven.
So when did you guys become like filing system?
NTFS was first introduced in 1993 as part of the Windows NT 3.1 release.
30 years ago.
It's
almost
literally
31.
It's literally, but it's been in place the entire time consistently. There's been no change to
By
it.
the time this episode goes live, it'll probably be 31 years old.
Backwards compatibility implies that there was a change to a standard, and an older standard has to be compatible with the
Not
new
necessarily.
standard.
No, yeah,
Yes,
that's not
that's
necessarily.
literally the definite. What?
Well, no, because it depends on what version of NTFS we're discussing. Because again, if he's saying, well, we're technically on NTFS version 3.0, but it still supports 2.0, 1.0, that is still backwards
There's
compatibility.
not a version of NTFS. It's just NTFS.
There's versions.
How many?
Well, we can look. I freaking hate Microsoft. So
I
haven't.
implore you, sir.
Let's see here. NTFS version number. If you're on Wikipedia, so version 1 was released with Windows 3.1. It's a
Okay.
1993 initial version. NTFS 1 is incompatible with 1.1 and newer, so there was some
Okay.
significant changes between 1 and 1.1. So they broke compatibility.
Yeah, so that there was no backwards compatibility. They said,
let's
no,
see.
here's the new thing. You have to use the new thing.
Windows NT 3.5 is 1.1. Let's see. 1.2 is with Windows NT 4. Version 3 was with Windows 2000. 3.1 was with Windows XP, and I think that's where this ends.
Yeah, so it's just NTFS.
LFS version 1.1 was replaced by version 2 is Windows 8 to improve performance. Yeah, but so there's been no improvements made to the file system over that period of time because we've been focused on
We're not
backwards
talking
compatibility.
about a storage medium and a hardware connection to that. We're talking about a filing system.
Yeah.
The operating system you're using uses that filing system, and it just is what it is. You
Well,
don't
we
have to
can't-
have any backwards compatibility. That's not a part of this equation.
Well, you would have to have some backwards
No.
compatibility to be able to read old disks.
No,
Yes.
Well, I
because
mean,
you're not going to be plugging a disk into a Windows 10 computer that has a Windows NT 3.1 file system on it.
You might not be, but
People
this
do.
happens.
Nobody's going to do that.
This
Oh,
happens.
nobody
No,
with
no, no,
half
no.
a brain is going to
No,
do that.
That is
Okay,
completely inaccurate.
for the audience, for our listeners, right now I am furiously
So do we
pointing
wanna,
at both
after
Matthew
after
and
we're
John.
done discussing the finer points of NTFS, I
No
can talk
sensible
about.
individual is going to do that.
Technically, right
I
now,
never said I was a sensible individual.
NTFS isn't even the new.
I never
isn't
said
even
you
the
weren't
current
a sensible-
standard. REFS is actually the new standard.
What's the new standard?
REFS.
Well, if that's is that Windows new standard?
yeah, that's Windows new standard.
So Windows 11 is running
That-
on
Hold on,
REFS.
hold on. So
So
Wikipedia said
that's
it
the
was-
resilient file system. Is a file system developed by Microsoft for Windows that was introduced in Windows Server 2012. It was designed to improve the new technology file system NTFS, which Microsoft introduced in 1993.
Is it running on Windows 11?
It's running somewhere out there. That's
Does
running
it
on
have
Windows.
Windows
does it have
Server
backwards
operating-
compatibility for NTFS?
Yes, it technically runs on
Windows
top of
Server
NTFS.
operating systems are completely different than Windows Desktop operating
Not that
systems.
different.
They're based on the same general generation, but they're not the same.
They're not that different though.
They're
That's
not the
thing.
same.
It's just a
They're
file
not the
system.
same.
It's just
They're
a
not
file
the same.
system,
It-
Steven.
The file system's the heart of the operating system.
Yeah, but it's just a file system. It doesn't matter if it's running on a server, on a desktop, or on a laptop. It's just a file system.
What's your opinion of Mac OS, the Mac Journal file system?
See, here's actually a good. Thank you, Nathan. That's a good example. Remind me again what the first one was. Right, the current one. We're on AFS, or was the AFS the previous one? Anyway, Mac OS changed their file system between High Sierra and Mojave, somewhere in that general time frame. And you had to do, like, there were things that did not come over, like that you had to change, or you had to go. I know you had to
It's
change
currently
something.
APFS.
APFS, thank you.
So they broke
Yeah,
compatibility.
I think it was previously AFS, and they changed it to APFS. Anyway, so they like did a whole new thing, and there were parts of the operating system you had to like run updates on or changes, and because it didn't work because there was no backwards compatibility with Windows. John, has there been a time when a new Windows version, like there was a complete polar opposite new thing that just like nothing from old operating systems would work on Windows because they changed NTFS?
Not that I can recall.
Well, literally, I just read it from Windows 3.1 to Windows
Of
3.5.
Modern
of
Windows in our
modern-
lifetimes.
Of modern, from the past 10 years, no.
You were alive then.
You weren't.
This has been during your lifetime. This is a little before my time, but this is
It has to be within your lifetime.
Don't tell anyone.
Not his IT career lifetime.
Not my IT. There we go.
Yeah.
That's a better.
okay. That's
Not-
a better
In our
clarifier.
professional careers.
Yeah.
Uh,
So, at least from what I can recall, no. Now, has there been some weird incompatibilities that have brought on when they bring in the new OS with your previous NTFS like layout? Occasionally, yes.
Well, that's just Windows Update. I mean, that's just Windows.
Never just upgrade from one major version to the other. Fresh install.
I will
all the way.
actually start to.
I would agree with you on that.
I think that's my.
I
that's my
actually start
position.
to disagree.
Ideally,
on some of that. Like I would say that for Windows Desktop, 100% agree with you on that point. I've actually been very impressed with Microsoft's in-place upgrades of their server OSs. Windows Server in-place upgrade has been phenomenal.
Server is a different operating system. It's built differently.
It's built more resilient.
Yes,
But
Why can't they do that for the desktop space?
Because it's not a server.
because the desktop also has to account for so many other different types of hardware-based platforms, base codes, kernels, things of that nature. Where in the server world,
it also
it's a
has
lot more fixed.
The Windows Desktop also has to account for simpletons.
You would think that they would make it more resilient because of the simpletons.
No, in a way, I see your argument, but because like almost any other OS in the world, you're having to tailor it to a point where it's unless you're being extremely strict, like what Apple does, where they restrict exactly what hardware it's allowed to run on and will only run on this specific hardware. As soon as you open up that platform to pretty much, we're going to be compatible with, well, I mean, Windows is now starting to get that way. As long as it's x86, it pretty much will run on it, as long as you meet the minimum base requirements. And that is very low, still even to this day. But the only one that Windows technically doesn't have full native support is Atom-based CPUs or the what do they call it? The little cores. What
ARM?
the ARM chips? Thank you.
Yeah, Windows on ARM.
Yeah, Windows on ARM is becoming much more of a thing. I know that it's still in very heavy development right now.
I
but
think Visual Studio is either in preview or they just released a version for Windows on ARM.
yeah,
Well, we have to keep in mind that
I know it's not. It's still technically in preview. It's not a full release as of yet.
well, and Snapdragon
Mm.
has they've released the Snapdragon laptop chips.
Yes, which those are going to
For
be
your Copilot Plus PC.
Well, those
Oh,
are actually going to be
God.
very interesting. I'm more interested in what Snapdragon is doing in the CPU spectrum than what both Intel and AMD is right now. I mean, Intel is doing something very interesting too, where they have their big little CPU architectures, where it's the big P cores, then the little E cores, for secondary taskings of that nature. And actually now them fully getting technically no longer going to be implementing hyperthreading going forward, at least on the desktop CPUs, because they have the big little. Why would you technically? Because hyperthreading was not adding on another core.
Yeah.
You were taking the available threads there and cannibalizing a certain section of that to then create a virtual thread to then help load balance and spread
Yeah.
and add more efficiency to it, which works great. However, now that cores are very easy to pretty much glue onto a substrate, why not just get
if
rid
you
of
can just-
hyperthreading and just add more cores?
Yeah, if you just have actually more cores, then there's not much point
Especially
for
with these E-cores these days, they're becoming very not just power efficient, but just overall just thread efficient for what they can actually do.
So, Matthew, would you like to describe for us the issue you ran into that prompted our discussion on file systems and such?
Yeah, okay. So to test out some new stuff on our build pipeline, what we were doing was installing the IIS web administration API software on our development server to test it out, play around with it, see if it's worth putting in production or if it's just we don't want to touch it, So the software was installed, we got it all set up, and then the next step was to edit the config file to do what we wanted, right? I had to set up that was weird. The folders that it could access, the user groups that could talk to the API, stuff like that. Well, I go navigate to in Explorer. I go navigate on the server. I go navigate to C program files, and then the administration API folder, and then it said, "Hey, no, you can't do that. Permission denied." And so it would let me hit the little prompt to continue, and then to view the permissions on the folder, and then that was about as far as I got. What really annoyed me is after I was talking to my boss about this, what really annoyed me was that I was able to use Windows PowerShell, open up the terminal and then CD across the drives into the folder, and then I was able to open up the config file that I needed in Notepad, and it was fine.
Did you have to, or were you able to open PowerShell as an admin?
Yes, I
Okay.
didn't try this in a non-elevated terminal.
Okay.
I just started with an elevated terminal and called it good.
So, correct me if I'm wrong. I think that avenue worked because, but when you elevated the PowerShell, did you use your same credentials that you were logged in with to elevate it? Okay.
Yeah, so I wasn't changing.
But
I
would
didn't
that pass
run it
through,
as a different user.
So between navigating through it in the UI in File Explorer and navigating through CD in PowerShell, that transfers the credentials used in the same way to the directory, right?
Yes, because you're authenticating against your own account when
Yeah.
you elevate it. However,
I feel like there's a reason in PowerShell it worked and it didn't work in the UI though.
I'm trying to think. Now, did you type out the full directory, or did you navigate directly until you got to the actual file you needed to modify?
So the first time around, I went folder by folder, and then
And it lets you traverse.
Yeah.
So your read permissions were fine. I think something on the NTFS system when you were operating it via the GUI, either I think someone made a change to the host folder that you were attempting to modify the file in, and the permission did not navigate down. But PowerShell lets you get into it, but PowerShell technically, even on that side, when you're doing your manual navigation, is a quote-unquote read-only, even though it's not full read-only, but it's read-only.
I had read permissions on the folder. So that was the weird thing, was I was able to navigate to it. I was able to open up the file in Notepad by launching it from PowerShell. And then I was able to navigate back to the folder through the PowerShell or the Notepad.
Yeah, because
but
file save dialog, it wouldn't let me save the file.
Yeah.
But it would let me navigate back to it.
Yeah.
Which, that's yeah.
Well,
because if you have read permission, then you
can't
can
modify the data. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why.
But isn't there also another
then why wouldn't
advanced permission?
Why wouldn't it let me
hold
read
on.
from
Isn't
Explorer?
there isn't there an advanced permission that is it's where you can, because read is effectively where you can see that they exist in File Explorer, like it's showing you like what is there. But isn't there an additional permission that could have possibly been turned off that normally comes along with read, but if you don't have it, it doesn't allow you to actually click on it and open and read the document? Does that make sense?
There is. I don't remember what it's called. It's
like view or
something. I think it's like the view permissions, but
Yeah.
it's similar to how
there could be even a custom permission set where it's like you can read, you can see that the file's there, but you can't open it.
Or if somebody did this with you, because these are also married, modify and delete are married. If somebody allowed you to have like turned off modify or turned off delete, you wouldn't be able to
It
open
turns
that
off
file.
modify as well.
Yeah, you wouldn't be able to do anything with it, pretty much.
This is very much, it's most likely a custom permission set issue,
somebody
as well as
adjusted
an
something,
inheritance
but
issue.
didn't do it right.
See, in Linux land, now granted, I'm not that much of a power user, so there could be some guru out there that's gonna come back in our comments or email us and say that's actually not how that works. But in my experience, read means read, write means write, and execute means execute. There isn't like
you're not thinking
granular levels of
there is an NTFS.
You can list the files and directories, but you can't.
There very much is an NTFS.
Yeah,
well, because
NTFS is what we call the monkey with the shotgun style of permissions, where it could be great. It could work out extremely well. You have a bunch of buttons and features and things that you can change. However, do they explain very well in detail what each of those buttons do and which ones interact with each other?
No.
Not at all. So it's very much a guessing game, kind of like playing Minesweeper some days, where it's like, okay, that now I'm over here, I know where these two bombs are, I know where these two bombs are, and now it somehow gave me a 9, which isn't possible. That's NTFS.
Yeah.
Especially if you uncheck that little box that says disable inheritance or no longer like
that'll really get you in trouble if you don't have things well, if you don't understand it, if you don't have it well documented, or just nobody ever communicates to anybody that it's been done. Oh boy.
Yeah,
this is the first time that I've ever had to really deal with anything outside of the log files, which never had a permissions issue with that.
But you're also navigating inside of C program files, which again, program files technically has its own permissions you have to gain access to on the OS side.
So that makes sense.
Because if you were set up again, based off your organization, you're an admin, but that's an admin in the domain controller and the Active Directory, not on the local machine.
So as far as I understand it, I was in the administrators group on the local machine.
Even then, if that
that doesn't make any sense to me. Either why there's these.
This is called granularity.
The granularity is just.
This is called granularity.
But again, like it's a dev machine. Dev machines get changed a lot. If that thing ever fell out of sync with the Active Directory controller and permissions were no longer being properly inherited, there's a lot of things that could happen.
It is the development server, so it could have.
Yeah.
This is why IT and development are separate.
Yes.
Yeah. This is
y'all do your thing really well, and it's a whole nother other
up
world,
and then
this
call
is
it good for
what
me.
this is what we. I don't want to say we, like me specifically, because I don't understand this stuff to
This
the
is what
degree
I
that
do.
other stuff like engineers do. I understand it on the top level, but just in general, IT holistically, this is what IT does.
I'm
Is
dev,
understand
I'm
this
not
to a granular
DevOps, so
degree.
that's
But I
That's
think
fair.
in this case, from the way you've described it, I think it can be pretty easily resolved in that you just go and restore inheritance.
well, it was resolved
There should
by
be an option in there where you can delete
Yeah,
unique
you go
permissions.
you go back to the actual parent folder
Yeah,
and you uncheck and recheck inheritance on that. You basically uncheck it,
Yeah.
apply, recheck it, apply. That then traverses all the way back down through all the subfolders, and you hit the little checkbox that says, apply against all subfolders, and
Yeah.
it overwrites all the custom permissions.
yeah,
and
it'll
it
just
restores everything
restore
back.
inheritance back to the root
Or
directory.
it's going to
Then
throw you a bunch of errors, and it's going to tell you which directory you need to go to. And then you have to go to that directory, go to that folder there, go and actually re-enable inheritance on that, delete all your current custom
Yeah.
permissions, navigate all the way back to the top, reapply your permissions, let it go and traverse back down, and then hopefully cross your fingers it'll work, or you have to reboot 7 times. And eventually it'll work. Windows.
and if all else fails, just re-image the server.
Exactly. delete it all and start over.
Yeah,
I hate
NTFS.
this so
It just
much.
works.
I hate this so much.
robust. This is what's.
I mean, like I understand
it's a
that
robust operating system.
having the granularity there. I can see a lot of use cases, and I can think of a lot of use cases off the top of my head. I just the foot guns.
If it's one of those things, if you truly do not understand,
And I can say that I don't.
yeah, what each of those permissions do when you modify them, especially on a folder or a nested folder that has now custom permissions with no inheritance on it, it's very, very easy to completely break access to that, and almost as difficult to even restore it if you even can, depending on what you disable. Because I ran into scenarios where we have broken NTFS so bad you can't open the folder. The only way that you can is you have to go back into recovery mode, PowerShell directly to that directory, and then basically have to by hand rebuild all the base permissions for it.
Oof.
It's not fun. Done it. Don't like doing it. Never want to do
Yeah.
it again.
No, and I mean it grants you, like, basically where my understanding of where all this comes in and why it is the way it is.
Mhm.
This harkens back to the olden days of full on-prem environments. Cloud was not even a twinkle in someone's eye yet. This was, everything was on a server, that where all of the server infrastructure and stuff that we know now comes from. And this is we have this massive file structure that is very detailed. Every department has their own directory, and it's broken down here and there, all this stuff. And Susan just got hired for the marketing team, and so she has access to the marketing directory, and has some specific folders in there that she's access to. But we want her to have access to this one folder, 3 directories down in the sales file system. And so NTFS is built robust enough that you can assign Susan access to just that one folder within a several layers down within a directory, and that's all she has access to. She can't see anything above, anything below, anything outside of that. You can drill down and give that very specific access. And this plays into the absolute headache that we deal with in the 365 world of people get SharePoint and they come from these like corporate environments and they think you can do that there too. And my God, no, you can't.
Well,
Technically, you
And
can.
technically you
No.
can. Should you? If you have
not
to,
not remotely to the degree that you can with a file server.
that is correct. But if you are considering the option of when you're in SharePoint and you're wanting to put in, because there isn't a native, or at least from the main interface, there is not a deny permission. You have 3 permissions. You have an owner, you have a contributor, and you have a reader. That is it. That means
Owner, member, and reader.
the contribute role is tied to mode. It's fine. Same thing. It's
Contributes different.
get out. It's fine.
Edit.
Editor, fine. Whatever. You have those 3
Say it right.
I don't care. I'm on vacation right now. Anyway, you have those 3 permissions, which none of those is a deny. You do not have a native deny role on the front side of SharePoint. You can put a deny in if you go into the advanced back end of SharePoint, which is technically the legacy back end, and you break inheritance, and then you can put denies in. Should you ever do this? No. It sets you up for such a hard set battle. Yes, you can. There is a deny. Why are you looking at me like that?
I've never seen this before.
You can block someone's access from there. Yes.
So we talked about booting off of Google Drive for the episode. What about booting off of SharePoint? How would you feel about that?
Oh dear sweet
I don't think
Jesus.
I actually do not think you can.
I don't think you could.
You can do it off of blob storage. You can do it off of Azure Files. You can do it off multiple other ways. SharePoint, I actually do not believe you technically could. OneDrive, there's a theory you probably can, but since SharePoint, I'm going to go with theoretically possible, yes. Should you ever attempt it? No.
Should you attempt it for science? Sure, but should you do that as a daily way of life?
Not even for science. What would you even do with that information? Why would you ever
want to?
You
can boot off of SharePoint. I think that would be fun. Like, I booted off of SharePoint.
You have Azure available to you. Azure is literally built to do that.
Well,
just use Azure.
That takes the fun out of it.
No. That's take any fun out of it. It gives you a new world of headaches and problems. You're literally over here.
He's a Linux user. He's used to that.
IT necromancy. Get out. No.
I'm gonna look this up and I'm gonna try this.
Actually, you know what? I'm glad you said that because that's kind of the metaphor I've been looking for this.
IT
this is it's not that exactly.
You're
but
dealing in the dark arts.
This that's what I don't. This is the part of the technology world.
It's all ones and zeros
that I don't understand why people do it. Anymore. It's the technology black magic. It's what you people in the Linux world and stuff do, like doing something just to say that you've done it. I don't understand that. I cannot wrap my brain around why. Like to an extent, like if you can find a way around something, or like the whole the freeware thing, like if you can find a way to do the same thing for free that you have to pay for, hey, I'm all on board for that.
Yeah,
I get that totally. But something like this, like there's literally no practical purpose for doing this, and it's just we do it because we can say we did it. That is the technical dark arts, and I don't understand.
I think this is something that should be attempted. I'm gonna do some research. I'm gonna look it up.
Not in our tenant, you're not.
Dr. Frankenstein probably thought the same thing.
Fair enough.
And he did actual necromancy.
Yeah. The fictional character, obviously. I know that he's not a real person. For the listeners.
He wasn't real?
No. Now, Robin Hood, on the other hand.
Well, obviously he's real.
Yeah.
Wow. I on behalf of some of our listeners,
every 3 listeners we have,
I understood maybe half of what has been said over the past 30 minutes.
You've also been over there browsing random things on your computer the entire time,
or falling asleep
and checking text messages
because I'm not following what is going on.
So NTFS is the Windows file system, and it was introduced in 1993.
Because I was also over thinking, okay, when was the last time I touched the file system from a Microsoft standpoint? Now, on my Mac, I do dabble with like the command line and stuff from time to time. So
terminal.
Yes.
As we've discussed, most normies don't even realize that there's anything outside of the downloads folder. Like that's
they know my documents exist. How to navigate
and that's
to
what
it,
I'd say. Like
they don't always know, but they do know my documents does exist.
Like realistically, I wouldn't expect you to have followed the things that we were talking about, because like even you in your experience, I would never have expected you to even deal with anybody dealing with file permissions.
Have you ever right-clicked on a file in Windows, gone to Properties, and ever clicked out of anything beyond the first General tab?
I actually have, but never from an access standpoint.
Yeah.
So you've never gone to the Security tab.
I've gone there. I've just not done anything.
Cool.
Yeah.
But for Matthew, you're not ever allowed to click that little advanced button inside the Security tab. You get to stay in just
for everyone's sake. Don't do it.
Just that normal front Security tab.
You do what you want.
No.
under Windows.
Yeah, in Windows, if you right-click on a file, you click Properties, takes you to the General tab.
Yeah.
Then it's
2 tabs over.
yeah, it's 2 tabs over Security. Inside Security, towards the bottom, there's an Advanced button. That's off limits to you.
See, you guys were dunking on me for like sync thing and overcomplications and stuff like that. That's what this sounds like to me. It's just read is read, write is
It's
write,
because it sounds
execute is execute. That's
no,
it.
it's because it sounds complicated when performed by professionals who are educated on how all this works and done correctly
No, like
and
I
documented
understand
correctly.
what we've talked about, and I understand why
This
all
is
of
how
these...
things are done, and this is a very robust way to do things.
Yeah, but why?
Is it good?
Just because you don't
No,
understand it
it's
doesn't.
not.
User can either read the directory or they can't.
See, you're talking. Well,
If you're talking in
about
terms of
simplifying
SharePoint,
something
yes,
too much.
that's fine.
No, I'm talking about in terms of just a file system in general. Read should mean read, not read means read unless
inside of except inside of Enterprise.
I can't
insert
I can't-
massive tree of
I
like
can't
different
not-
branching
this is
statements.
one
It
that-
exists
to be
that way
fair-
for a reason because Steve Ballmer said it had to.
Yeah,
The
exactly.
sweaty man says we need this, so they have it.
To be fair, I don't think I know I can't. I can't justify and defend Microsoft's terminology for everything.
Oh no, you
That-
never should.
No. We can't
This is
just
the same Microsoft that
Yeah.
said we don't need QA anymore and eliminated all of that.
right. Yeah,
That's
yeah,
worked out great
so,
for
so
them.
no. We can't defend that aspect. What you're talking about, that aspect of it, no, we can't
Yeah.
defend that.
Okay.
The function of it, the eventual function of all of it, no. I mean it works. It's worked for a long time.
Obviously, since 1993.
Since 1993. But the vernacular, if you will, no, it's terrible. Usually is with Microsoft.
But like I said, it's like handing a monkey a shotgun. Just don't do it. Or if you do, be behind the monkey.
Something tells me that that can change very quickly.
It's one of my favorite. So when I was back in college and I was attempting to do my developer phase, which I learned I hate development with a passion. So Matthew, good on you for doing that. Our main
you.
coding teacher, the second day we were in there, was like, oh yeah, like C++, it's a great coding base, decently easy to learn and all that. However, because you're writing directly to the OS the majority of the time, every single one of you right now are considered a monkey with a shotgun. You can either follow directions, this is going to turn out extremely well, or you're going to completely nuke your OS. And that is by far my favorite way to describe a lot of this because NTFS filing systems doing permissions, same thing. It can be a wonderful thing. You can end up, having a great time, or you're going to come back looking like the Black Knight.
Is that what the
No
FS
limbs.
stands for? It's not file system, it's foot shotgun.
Or just foot shot.
Nope.
So I've been over here just thinking, if you're running if you have Microsoft 365,
Sure.
you're running.
You're not using this anyways, though.
You're running OneDrive the way you're supposed to. You've deployed and are utilizing SharePoint the way you're supposed to.
Sure.
Or Azure Files, because Azure Files works sometimes when it's set up correctly.
Would you ever touch the file system?
Well, okay. Who
Like
are
intentionally?
You
Would
Who
you
are you referring to?
the average user?
The end user? No.
The end user, actually, no. Like, the majority of the ones that I've actually moved to the cloud now, they do...
What?
They do the majority of it out of a web browser. Like, we force everyone to use the
But
web browser for all of their file navigation.
In context, the term file system in this example
Foot shotgun.
is no.
No.
The term file system is referring to something a little different than in True Blue Windows because an owner of a SharePoint, a user who's in the owner group, they can go to main page of the SharePoint, settings, permissions. It pops out that little sidebar and it shows you the owners, members, visitors groups, and they can assign people or take people away from those groups. That is, for all intents and purposes, accessing the file system. By definition.
But you're not accessing the
But you're not.
built-in
No,
Windows
you're not
file.
going. Yeah,
You're
exactly.
not opening the file explorer to navigate to that
because it doesn't have one.
Well, it does via the OneDrive backend, but I disable all of that because if you are accessing SharePoint via the File Explorer, I need you to go ahead and just leave because we have ran into so
You
many
have-
problems across.
You've
not-
gone through the wrong door. You need to turn around and go back the way you came.
You have read access unless
No, the big reason
is-
why OneDrive is great if you leave OneDrive to do its one thing, which is sync the files that it's allowed to from the local machine.
you sync thing.
Get out.
We're not talking about sync thing. We're talking about strictly utilizing Microsoft.
Doing that one
tools.
later.
Later, not right now.
We had this conversation.
Not
The
right
best way
now.
to use Microsoft products is not at all.
Not right now.
Not everyone has that.
Why
option.
do you do dual boot from Linux to Windows, Matthew?
The only reason why I have Windows installed on a partition on my laptop is for proctored exams.
And just as I said earlier today,
That is
why do
literally the only
why
reason.
do the majority of people not use Linux? Because of Linux users.
I am proud to be a freetard.
And that's fine, but you also shouldn't be strong arming and strong guarding Linux and completely downing another Windows OS just because it's not your preferred. There are pluses and minuses to both, and that is why you see so many people being diversified and using between Apple's hardware, Microsoft's OS, Linux running on literally everything else. There's options for a reason. It's based off your preference and what you're willing to learn and adopt. The majority, and why it's the majority case still, Windows is so popular because, one, it's been a set standard for a long time, and Microsoft dumped a lot of money into it to be the endo facto standard. And two, because out of the majority of the other OSs available, Mac OS and Windows are still the most user-friendly.
100%.
Linux is still
Dumb.
not.
Now,
If you do not have at least a basic fundamental understanding of how the computer works, especially around the Linux OS, you will struggle significantly. Mac is
I would argue that that's changed quite a lot just in the last few years.
it
it
has,
has changed, but it's still not as simple of if I go right now and I take either of the two Macs in this room and hand it to either your parents or to a random stranger on the street, 9 times out of 10, they're going to be able to use it decently well. Do that with a Windows machine. Almost the same result. Do that with a Linux machine. Depending on the distro, a lot of them are probably going to struggle.
now
Well,
I can
let's take Ubuntu for example because that's the most popular. There's not going to be that much difference at all.
so
You-
okay,
you
hold
say that
You say
from
that.
just the build perspective, but the user
Well, what
experience
kind of
from you have to think
what kind of
average,
user are we talking about?
average Joe
Average
Schmo
user.
off the street.
Okay, average Joe Schmo off the street.
You
That all he
hand-
does is save stuff to his downloads folder and opens a web browser.
Okay, so it's actually I have
There's going to be literally no difference.
You
there
say
is
that-
Chrome is
no
Chrome,
there
no
is
matter where
You
you're
no,
haven't
there
experienced
absolutely
the
is.
number of people that have been up in arms because they upgraded from Microsoft Office 2010 to Microsoft Office 2016 and were incapable of doing their job because it looked different. I wish I was kidding. I wish I was making
No, I
a joke.
believe you. I believe you.
But I don't think you've experienced that enough to that's
you are
where
putting
this is
way
coming
too
from.
much hope in humanity.
You are putting way too
Well,
much.
that's
giving
not.
people
hold-
That's
false
not a,
credit.
hold-
that's
hold
not
up.
a pro in favor.
No, but you're
of-
talking
Okay.
about basic
No,
general
we're talking about
functions.
user friendliness. That's not user friendliness because
If
Windows
somebody-
is inherently user friendly. That's user friendliness because that's familiarity. There's a difference there. There's a significant
Yes,
difference
but
there.
Ubuntu is still
Okay.
unfamiliar to them. If
I
you
would-
ju- it,
I
So
would-
are we talking
I
about
would agree-
familiarity or are we talking about user friendly?
I would
I'm
agree
telling
with your
you from
position.
the perspective here of we are taking a random person off the road. And also, I need this to be clear because we are currently talking in an echo chamber right now. We know the average user is never talking to their friends about what OS do you prefer to use.
Really?
We are aware of this. But for this example, what are the odds of you actually handing your Linux machine right now to a random person on the street and saying, you try using this? What is the success rate? I will tell you it would be significantly lower than either of a Mac
but
or
not
Windows
zero.
machine. Not zero.
Well, again, it goes back to
But I'd say 50-50.
What kind of user
wouldn't even
are
say
we
that.
asking? Are we talking about? Because navigating the file system is exactly the same. You open up the file.
Okay, hold on.
Okay,
Let me
all right,
no,
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 let
do
me
they
jump
even
in.
know
Let
what
me
that
jump
to
in.
looks
your
like on
point, to your
Windows?
point, I think in this,
Do they know what it looks
if
like
we
on
were
OS?
talking about these are two different examples. We're talking about an adult. We're talking about somebody 28 or older, right? Who has life experience, who's used other things. if this example was applied to a 6-year-old, they had never used a computer before.
Yeah.
This was their first computer. I think you have a point, because from a natural cognitive logic standpoint of you need to do a thing, how do you do the thing on this thing? I agree that yes, things have come a long way and there's distros where it's fairly intuitive and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That could be the case. You can't apply that same logic to an adult who has life experience and who has
I think you
familiarity
can.
with it.
No,
you
you
can't.
No,
can't.
you really can't.
So let's
That's
say
being
let's
very
say that I
unrealistic.
hand my laptop. I'm running Debian and I'm using KDE as my desktop.
That means
right?
nothing to this person you're handing it to.
What it doesn't have to, right? So on Windows, let's say that the average user wants to go to their file explorer and go to the downloads folder. What are
Sure.
they going to do? Everybody's going to have a different way of doing it. Some of them
Does
might
that
have a
folder look
shortcut
like
in
the Windows folder?
Some of them might have that shortcut in the taskbar.
See, my folder has a little blue little bracket
Some of them
thing,
might
like it's in
have,
a holder.
Uh,
Yours is going to be orange or purple or something, and it's not going to
some
look
of
like
them
this.
might search for it. There's a bunch of different options. The way that KDE is set up by default is that the taskbar is along the bottom, right?
That helps.
And then there's a, in quotation marks, start menu on the left. So they just click on the logo on the left, and then it opens up a start
How
menu.
do they know how to do that? How do they know? That's where they click.
You click it.
No, how do they know that's where you navigate
No,
to
no,
do
no,
that?
no. So are we asking, because the definition of the user, I think, is changing every single time that I bring up a
To
point
be
of
fair,
similarity here.
To be fair,
No, I understand.
we are
your-
very cynical on this subject, so
I
that's
know your
playing
familiarity,
into this.
but again, that's different than going from Windows to even Mac. Like, okay,
Are we
Open
talking
the
about an
file
average
explorer.
user, or are we talking about a normie?
Okay, I'll
That's
give
the
you an
same
example. I'll
thing.
give you a real world example.
it's the same thing.
Real world
Because if a
example.
normie is, I cannot function without the exact file explorer logo, well, then all hope is lost no matter
But
what.
that's-
You've just
but-
described 80% of people on this
Well,
planet.
they can't even use Windows. That's not a fair comparison.
Okay, let
Who
me jump
then
in.
are you handing this thing to?
Hold
We said
up.
a
Let me
normal
say
person.
something here.
Go for it.
There has only ever been.
We need to do man on the street.
Hold up. You've been talking.
Hostility on the Road needs to do man on the street interviews. That's
Hold
what we
up.
need to do.
My turn now. My turn now. So I've actually probably used Linux. If I have not used more distros than Matthew, it's close, because I actually have, at one point I had 6. Okay, yes, I have. I 100% have, because keep in mind, even that old tower that I have, I had like 6 on there at one time. And then I for a long time I had Parallels on my Mac, and I would have probably 4 or 5 distros
Gag.
going at any point in time. On Windows, on now, admittedly, I was at a massive corporation, so this really isn't a fair comparison. But Windows in Parallels, a clean install on Parallels was way better than anything I'd had to deal with at work. It was. I stand by that. So I've used a ton of distros. Only one Linux distro, one, and I am an advanced user. I was trying very hard, and I know how these things work. There is only one Linux distro that never made me want to throw my computer out the window at any given point. Pop! OS, for those listening, in my opinion, is the only Linux distro that has done it correctly for the average user.
That's completely fair. Because like even with my experience with now 5 different Linux distros, Pop! OS and Ubuntu were the only 2 that like I didn't want to completely.
I hate Ubuntu.
myself.
Vanilla Ubuntu, I hate vanilla
Vanilla
Ubuntu.
Ubuntu, I will definitely tell you, it was a learning curve because my first experience with Ubuntu, I don't remember what version it was, but it was over 10 years ago at this point, and I was installing it on an old Dell D600 laptop that we were trying to get more life out of at that point, and that was also a nightmare coming from someone who was at that period administrating Windows for at least 3 years, jumping headfirst into Linux and trying to get all that. I will tell you, was a nightmare. Yes, Steven, this isn't a classroom. You don't have to raise your hand.
Really? Is it not?
He doesn't have the mute button. so he
Dad
kinda
yelled
does
at
have
me,
to raise
so-
his hand.
I finally got my words in edgewise, so go ahead.
So, real world example, and I'm only hearkening to this example because I like that word now. I've used it a couple of times.
Hearkening.
I'm only going to this example
Hearken away.
because you made the comment about
Don't say
Mac
that again.
and
What
and
comment
like
about a
handing
Mac?
someone a Mac. right? And
I
having
didn't make the
music.
comment, but I agree. That
Okay,
it's,
but then that's what
but
reminded me of this.
there's more significant differences between a Mac, a base
Okay,
Mac,
hold on. I'm gonna
and
mute you
base
again.
Windows.
I understand that.
Continue, Stephen.
Let him.
So, imagine, if you will, it's 2007. A young lad, a younger Stephen, goes to college, right? Got his first laptop. My experience up to that point was Windows. It was Windows 95, 98, 2000. I don't, and XP. So I got my first laptop, which came with Vista. It was a great operating system.
It was the best.
We'll get to that
version
another
of Windows
time.
ever. Obviously,
So
8 was
so
better
that's
than
what
8.
I was using.
That's
you
so
know,
wrong on so many levels.
Yes, that was severe sarcasm.
day to day, still using with the current
He
Windows.
still uses Vista on his other laptop.
I don't remember the circumstance exactly. My laptop was dead, or I left it somewhere, or something. I didn't have it. I
You
needed
took your laptop for a walk and it ran
I needed
away.
to. I was in my dorm room with my roommate, and I needed to check Blackboard for something. And so this was the early days of Blackboard too.
It's been around that long. Wow.
Yeah. So
It's terrifying.
so he had a Mac. I had never seen a Mac before until I had this guy as my roommate. And I was like, hey, like, do you mind if I use your computer real quick? I just need to get online and check something. Sure, absolutely. And then he left. Like, he was going somewhere. He's like, yeah, sure, it's on the desk. Use it, no problem. And so, cool. Sat down the computer. I kid you not. It took me, I may be exaggerating a little bit, but it felt like 15 minutes to figure out how to get on the internet. Because who in their right mind named a web browser Safari? But due to infamiliarity, due to something not being intuitive for a basic, average, simpleton user,
Yeah.
I couldn't get on the internet because there was no thing like Internet Explorer is one of the most to their credit, one of the most self-explanatory applications ever made.
Yeah,
it's the thing that explores the internet. And I get where they were going later on. I got where they were going with the whole Safari thing. They're trying to be
It's
cute.
not illogical.
They're trying to be cute. No, it's not logical.
No, it's not illogical.
Yes, Macs are like Mac in this example is, touted as this like simple, like, anybody can get it and pick it up and just start using it. No, they can't. The good old boy from a small town just picked it up. I was like, how do you get all? My experience was with Internet Explorer and Netscape. And I'm just like, internet. I literally searched. I figured out the search function.
There you go.
I did. Like the first, I was like, hey, there's a little thing.
Which Microsoft didn't have a good one at that time.
I typed in internet. It still didn't pull up Safari.
At that time. There was no.
Let's
so
see,
anyway,
you said what year was this?
That was 2007.
2007 would have been Snow Leopard. So. Yeah,
It had Spotlight.
Oh, that's a while.
Yeah,
ago.
man.
While ago. Well, no, I don't think it was Spotlight. I think it was still Sherlock at that point.
Maybe.
Of course it was.
But-
It was still superior to whatever
the
Windows
example
had.
stands.
Anyway, that's my personal experience example
on
of
a machine that they have not used before. How is that end user supposed to organically figure this out?
It goes back to what kind of user are we talking about? Are we talking about a user that has memorized a set of steps to accomplish a task?
Matthew.
Or are we talking about a user that has a basic understanding of what they're looking for? They're not looking for this specific icon, and then they're clicking on the bar that pops up, and then they're searching for Google.
I'll give you two
They
users.
are looking for an internet browser,
Can I
which
give you-
may or may not be Chrome.
Can I give you two users?
Yes.
I'm going to give you two users.
Okay.
Okay. User number one is user number one, general like ER nurse at a hospital.
Yes.
Okay. That's her day-to-day job. That's where she she interacts with a computer at home, he or she, but also a computer at work. That's their experience. User number two is a corporate real estate broker. Broker, is that the right word? The people
Yeah.
that actually do the sales of the
Sure,
things.
yes.
Yeah, we'll go with that. And they use a Mac because it's got to be flashy and fancy and stuff for client interactions and such. But that's their, and of course they use this said Mac for both work and personal because that's what you do apparently when you have a Mac. There you go.
we're
Those are
talking
your,
about
those
handing
are your
my
two users.
computer-
Now,
if we're-
what? Now, those two users, in your opinion, what's the probability of applying your example for them to be
I
able to
hand my
pick that
laptop
up?
to them, and they
Yes.
figure out how to do something.
Yeah, ask
I
somebody.
would say handing my laptop to a Windows user, as is, my laptop right now, as is, booted into Debian, handing it to a Windows user, they would have an easier time than handing it to a Mac person.
Can
Because
you
like
give
I
a-
said earlier.
Can you give a ballpark roundabout percentage chance?
Well, okay, so I have Edge right in my taskbar right
Okay,
here. They
pause.
can figure out
Pause.
Edge.
If you right now
there.
took your laptop, a C-suite member,
Steven just verified.
I know, but I'm saying a bone stock
Bone
Linux
stock.
right now, your Debian install right now,
Yes.
you fresh OS install, no changes. You
Which
literally
would not have Edge on it.
would not have Edge on it. But someone from your C-suite right now says, I need to use your computer to
That's actually a good example.
print off a PDF or something. Just do a
Yeah.
very basic office task right now. You are allowed to give no guidance. They said, hand me your laptop right now. You go over there. How likely would they be able to navigate your OS, bone stock, and be successful in a reasonable amount of time? Reasonable is all dependent on, let's say, printing a PDF. Printer's already technically pre-installed. It's in a corporate environment, blah, 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 whatever. That's already all done. They just need to open up the document, print it, and they're done. Reasonable amount of time.
Depends on where the document is. Is the document on a flash drive or is it in their email? Like how many
Always
steps?
in their
That's
email.
it.
What
No,
are you
no, no.
talking about?
Okay,
It's
so
in
it's
their
in
email.
The
So then,
documents are always in their email.
by default, Debian has Firefox installed. So assuming they don't know what Firefox is, they would have a tougher time. If they're a slightly intuitive user and they're like, okay, well I'm just going to click on this icon on the
There's a
taskbar.
non-0% chance they wouldn't know what Firefox.
Again,
Yeah.
it's
Then there's that.
it-
Now,
it's a
if I'm
member of
allowed
your-
to say, hey, Firefox is the web browser, click on that, and then you can go sign
no
into your stuff.
no guidance here, because again, you want the entire point of determining if a OS is user friendly or not is how organically successful are they able to navigate it without any guidance. That's how you determine if something is user friendly.
Well,
I should not.
Do they have any familiarity with anything else?
Toss that out of your head. This is net new information for
That
them.
new information.
This is net
How
new.
to check their Facebook
They
on their
would have-
iPhone.
You have to remember when you're determining how successful
Yeah.
something is user intuitive.
Yeah.
Remember that term, user intuitive. You
Yes.
hear that described against
No,
phones.
I understand what you're saying, and I agree. I think the difference here is that you guys are arguing that Windows is more user friendly, but
I'm
it's
not
just
at all.
it's market share and
no, I'm
familiarity. That
saying-
doesn't make it user friendly.
I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying based off of how the current market lays out, how it is as is today.
Yeah.
You bring in literally 3 random individuals, random backgrounds, don't know anything about their technical prowess. Nothing at all. You have a Mac, you have a Windows, and you have a Linux PC. Ubuntu installed on it right then and there. They're all given the exact same task. Log into your email, open up the PDF we sent you, and print the PDF. Each one has to go across each of those individual machines,
Yes.
and it's a pass-fail.
It'd be a challenge for me, honestly.
Okay.
And
well,
I
let
know
me-
Linux pretty well.
Let me turn this around. What about Debian is difficult? Let me ask you that, because I can point out specific things with Windows. Like let's say you open up the start menu and you go to search for Internet Explorer or Edge, like whatever they're familiar with, okay? Or just that. What happens? You're going to search for it. If it's not
comes
an
up.
exact match, it's going to then open a browser. So you get to a browser, but then it's going to search for something in the browser instead of on the desktop.
Completely agree with you.
That's
Windows
not
search
the
is
case
garbage.
with this.
I didn't even spell it right.
Well, that's Windows 10.
Sir,
The most
that's
ubiquitous
Windows!
version at the moment.
Windows 10, Windows 11 is
It's
based
still
off the...
It's based off the same, but we can argue that there's significant differences.
You're arguing semantics right now. We are saying...
That's
when
what
you're
we've been
looking
doing
at the
for
market,
30 minutes is arguing semantics.
because you kept trying to say, oh, but this user back here doesn't have this type of background, or this user over here has this type of familiarity background.
Okay.
We don't give a crap
So let's
about that
bring it back.
background.
Let's bring
you
it back.
didn't listen to
What
the
is-
examples at all.
What is user unfriendly about the average?
Pretty much almost
No.
anything.
You have to pick out a specific thing. What is user unfriendly about it? What is something that the average
Simple.
user would run into an issue with?
Updates. Updating
Updating.
Linux
Why is updating an issue?
because
It's in
it
the wrong place.
sure, but because If you go and type into Google, right, and you're handed a Linux laptop, right? You're told this needs an update.
Yeah.
How do you update it? It's either going to give you a prompt, you click update, and it's going to do it for yourself, or you're having to either go through command line, update it manually, or you're having to navigate through the system menu to then try to find update, which isn't always labeled update or upgrade
So that was
or
that
promote.
was how it was 10 years ago.
No, it's not.
But
I have 6 different Linux distros installed in my
when's the
lab
last time you installed Ubuntu?
literally last week.
Because
Server and desktop.
So Ubuntu has the store, right?
Yes, it
So
does.
you have the App Store for you have the Windows Store for Windows. You have the App Store for Mac. You have the store here.
No one.
You can go
Windows
there
Update's not in
and
Windows
you can
Store.
update that. If
Who
you're updating
knows how
apps,
to
then
do
there's
that?
that. But
Again.
how are you going to get to Windows Update? You have to dig through settings, or you have the prompt. It's the
You
exact
don't.
same thing. You're describing the exact
No,
same
No,
dig
it's
through,
not.
Dig through is unfair because I click on settings and right there's update and security. It's
Because
in
in
it's in
Ubuntu,
the
it's
root,
not right
It's
there
in the
either.
root level of settings.
I will say, for most Linux distros that I've used, things like the setting menus are highly unintuitive. The
Basic file navigation, if you aren't familiar with Linux file system,
yes,
is
it is very.
difficult
I find
to
it
if you're
navigate.
navigating outside of the user directory.
if you're
If
The
you're
user
even-
directory
if
is
you're
structured
even-
exactly the same.
Depending on
Documents,
distro.
pictures, music. It's the same no matter where you are.
But if you click the arrow one time too far,
That's the same no matter where you are. If they are unfamiliar with anything outside the user directories on Windows, on Mac, on Linux, it doesn't matter. That's exactly the same.
I find it. I find it easier to navigate now.
I don't know why
I'm-
you're looking at me the way you're looking
I'm-
at me. I also am a Linux user, my guy.
You're not describing it in anywhere near familiar light. Because if you're talking about
That's not the
if
point
you're
of the
talking about you're
argument.
used to going into, you're opening up a terminal and then you're saying sudo apt update, sudo apt upgrade. Yes, that's a little user unfriendly, but that's not what I'm describing here. So like what I have
Oh, that's
here
I've not even
is I
talked
have
about command
Debian and
line.
KDE. If I want to update stuff, I just open up the store, which is on my taskbar, and
But
then
who,
it has
but
an
who,
update prompt
but who
right
even
there.
knows to open the store to update something? Where in Linux does it tell you to do
Yeah,
that?
you don't go to
It
the
depends
store
on
in
the distro.
Windows
Oh,
or
right
Mac.
here, right here, right here. I have a notification that says you have security update.
Cool.
And then I can click on the notification. It's the
Because
exact same.
I will tell you this, in
thing.
my Ubuntu desktop that I have sitting there for my dev machine, I rarely ever get a prompt to update ever. You have to manually go into the system settings, navigate over to update, and manually run it. Almost every single time.
Is Ubuntu the one that update is also, it's in the top right corner, like the settings
I
thing
haven't
is in the
used
top
stock
right?
Ubuntu in I don't know how long, so
Okay.
I couldn't tell you. I have kept up with most of this.
The
And last time that
'Cause
I
I
used
think
it
the
was pretty
two,
user-friendly.
because you have some basic familiarity with it. The perspective I'm coming out here is from somebody who has used a Mac, who's used Windows, then makes a leap actually into Linux. It's a very
Well, but we're
unfamiliar
talking about there
pool.
is baggage from a
Also,
so we've
well-
changed the definition of the user that we're talking about 10 times. First it was
Because
they're familiar
you
with
have
Windows.
been asking
What's
multiple
the-
different
what's-
examples. We
what's
give the
the-
example, and you say that's not a good example because of X, Y, and Z. If you want fixed, I gave you fixed numerous times.
Do they have
numerous
do they
times.
have familiarity or do they not?
With what?
With what?
Just
what?
the user that we're talking about. Do they have familiarity with
With
anything or
what?
not? Do they have familiarity with anything or not?
Pick something. Just pick something.
You have to pick
No,
something.
no. Do they have familiarity with any? You pick an
human
operating
alive-
system. Do they have any familiarity
I
with
said
any of
that.
them?
I said take your average C-suite user who typically uses a Mac or Windows. That is basic
Yes.
functionality.
Okay,
I said, if
with
they take
Windows-
your laptop right now from a basic state of the OS and attempt to do a basic task, how are they expected to complete it based off the user feedback the machine gives you? The one thing that Mac does great is it provides fairly good user feedback of when you do something wrong. It screams at you. Windows will let you get kind of cobbled, and then you'll have to unfix your own web. Linux, at least a lot of the distros out there, does not hold your hand, and if you screw something up, it's just like, oh, okay. This is how I exist now. Best examples, go look at all the YouTubers that did the Linux 30-day challenge. and see how they attempted to do normal.
Those are all power. No, I watched those. Those were all power users trying to do power user things, and it's completely different on that level.
Not all of them. I watched guys that literally all they do is play games. They installed Linux and they just want to play games.
I would argue that
That's not fair,
That's not the average user. That's not a user that's opening a web browser to check their email.
And I think you are really dumbing down what an average user does. Because the average user, they will check email. They will watch YouTube. They will watch Netflix. They will browse Facebook or Instagrams or any of the other marketplaces out there.
Okay, what's the common theme of everything that you just listed there? They're all in the web browser. That's all they have to do. So the platform doesn't even matter. It's just, can they get to a web browser?
So here's the
Then we should just put out a challenge to see, why don't you go ahead and you have a large pool of individuals at work or in your personal life that have never touched Linux before, right? Why don't you go ahead and run a scientific test where you just have 3 machines available or even 2 machines available, 1 Windows, 1 Linux, your preferred distro. You set it up your way how you would for a net new user to make it as easy as you possibly can for them. Give them 5 tasks of opening the web browser, doing basic things in a web browser, doing something basic on the OS, and run an update.
I think we should also note that and I'm also I work with more of these than Matthew does, but John and Steven work with way more than I ever will. And to me, it is personally shocking the amount of people who grew up with Windows.
Yeah.
That was the only thing they've ever used. How many of them struggle with doing anything basic on it?
Well, that's because
it is
users
shocking.
are terrible.
And to the point as far as
that's
my only
that's
my only confusion in
if
this
a
whole
user
That's
thing.
not
is
a point in the favor of you. That's no
That's
point for
my only
anyone.
If the
confusion.
user is
Point.
incompetent, the operating system doesn't matter.
But you're giving them so much credit.
Yes.
In the same breath, you are making that statement, but then you are turning right around and giving
I've
this
said this,
same group
I don't
of
know
people
how many
the
times.
credit
It depends on the user. Is the user competent or is the user incompetent?
And you're not giving any examples how a user can be competent.
I'm a competent user, and I struggle. I do hesitate to use this as an example because I've had a Mac for as long as I've had a computer, and for as long as I've had access to a Mac, and that's a minority.
We did grow up on Macs.
Because I grew up on it, and in my really digging days, it was a Mac, so I do understand it better than most people do, just because that's how it was. And then when I started professionally, that's when I started working with Windows. I bought a Windows PC to try to figure it out, to be able to figure it out without having to deal with the corporate lockdowns and stuff. And so Mac, which especially in those days was Unix based, and there was actually, if you knew how to do certain things like command line type things on Mac, it translated easily to Linux. So that jump wasn't hard. But even having that background, for me, and I am a competent user,
Yes.
doing most functions other than, and only recently it's gotten a lot better, but most functions that don't include a web browser are hardest on all Linux distros except for Pop! OS than it is on any of the other two, in my personal experience.
And that's fair, but that's because you have so much built-in experience with a different operating system. So your brain is wired to use Mac OS.
And you see, I would argue that plays a very, very small role.
I would argue that it plays a greater role than you understand. Because the same thing goes with Windows. The same thing goes with Linux. Whatever a user is familiar with, obviously that's going to be the thing that they have the easiest time with. Whether they have an easy time at all, right? If it's an incompetent user, and it's an incompetent user.
Well, and I think there's one factor here that you're not taking into account. And this, I classify this as outside of incompetence. And for the listeners, we use the word incompetence affectionately
We adore
most of the
you.
time.
It's not incompetence; it's job
So,
security.
but anyway, I this term I'm going to use. This is separate from incompetence, but there is intimidation There are users, and I don't even think that this, in my recent experience, in my professional experience, this is not an age thing. I would have used to think that it's an age thing, but it's not. There is just intimidation with new things
Yeah.
and unwillingness to, not just unwillingness to learn, but unwillingness to even do something as simple as figure out a task that you're describing. Just here, try it on this.
Yeah.
There's a larger number of people than you think that would simply fail that task because they would be daunted by it, they would be intimidated by it, ergo they would mentally shut down, ergo they would just say, no, I can't.
Yeah, because in that test, that eventually,
I think that's a much bigger factor here.
yeah.
And it's one that we haven't,
If
that
they
hasn't
have
been considered.
they have
I
a
mean,
familiarity with something and they're being asked to do that same task in
they
something
only
different.
know how to do the task on the one thing that they do it on every day. And if you hand them anything different,
Yeah.
they will just mentally shut down.
Well, that's because they've memorized a path to doing a task.
But
They
I'm
have
saying-
memorized steps. They haven't formed any kind of understanding.
That's
So,
okay.
and that's where I would argue,
no, that's
if
also
they
not
had
even fair.
memorized to do those steps on a Mac or a PC or a Linux distribution, it would be the same if they tried to go to something else, because it's not the operating system that's providing user friendliness. It's the familiarity because they've done the same task over and over and over and over and over. Does that make sense?
It makes sense.
Does that make sense?
I
Windows doesn't
disagree,
matter.
though.
Mac OS doesn't matter. Any given Linux distribution doesn't matter. If they had memorized the task and that's all they know, they don't understand what's happening.
Mhm.
They just know I have to click on this, I have to type this in, I have to click on this. That's what they have.
Mhm.
They have a rote memorization of a specific task. That has nothing to do with user friendliness.
There is. So, are you saying user friendliness is irrelevant?
No, I'm not saying
So
user
then
friendliness
where
is
does user
irrelevant. I'm saying
friendliness
that
come
what
into
we've
play?
described here, user friendliness is not a factor in that.
So, okay, where
because
is
it's an
user
incompetent user that has memorized a task.
Where is user friendliness then using that theory? When
He's just
does
throwing
user
terms around right now that I don't think actually correlate to what his argument
when
is
does
stating.
when does user friendliness come into play? So if you're saying user
It depends
friendliness
on
is
what we're
relevant-
talking about, because the definition has changed 10 times. Now stop. Let me talk. You are talking about a user that has memorized a task. I'm pointing to Steven for the listeners. You, John, are talking about I'm giving 3 different laptops to a user and we're hoping that they can figure it out, but we don't have any sort of definition of what these users are. Are they familiar with one of the operating systems?
'Cause
Are they a
that's not-
completely blank slate? That
'Cause
makes
that's
a difference, as we've discussed previously.
But
with
we
Nathan.
keep saying random, but that's the thing. No,
that's
our
the
examples
thing.
keep beginning with take a random user.
And then you
That
want to
illogis-
Take
fix
a random
then
user.
You want a fixed
Okay,
definition
yes.
of what a random
Take
user
a
is. You
random
can't.
user, and then with the market share that Windows has, they can probably figure it out on Windows best because of familiarity, as we discussed with Nathan's point. If they had
That
been
actually wasn't my
familiar,
point. You're
That
missing my
wasn't at
point.
all.
Mac
You're missing
OS,
my point.
If Mac
you're
OS
misunderstanding my
you're
point.
missing my point. If Mac OS had the greater
Okay,
market
pause,
share, and
pause.
we handed them that,
You
that's what they would understand.
No,
the conversation would have flipped in Apple's direction instead of Microsoft's direction.
because you have completely misconstrued of what the original argument even was.
We're talking about user friendliness, but we're not defining what user friendliness is.
It's the ease of use of how a user can operate the OS based off the initial feedback the OS gives you. No guidance, no nothing. That is the same way of I've never used an Android device in your entire life, and
Yeah.
you are handed a Samsung phone right now, and you're just going to go about your day trying to do everything that you would do on a smartphone.
Yeah.
No feedback, no nothing. That's what we're asking your feedback on.
Well, then let me explain. You have three devices. You have a Mac, you have a Windows PC, and then you have a Linux distribution. Okay, blank slates, fresh installs. We've skipped the login step just to make this simple for everybody. You see the desktop. You're given 0 feedback on all of them. You have on Windows, you have your taskbar with the default icons. On Mac, you have the dock. On let's say I'm just going to keep using Debian and KDE as my example here. You also have a very similar looking taskbar with your default icons on the dock. You have there's nothing that says, hey, you're a new user. Would you like to browse the web, create a document, XYZ? That doesn't happen.
I know.
That
On
doesn't
actually
happen.
fresh
So at that
installs, it
point,
typically does.
fresh installs, it's going to be a very similar experience between, at least in my example here, Debian and KDE and Windows, Mac is going to be the outlier there because instead of a taskbar along the bottom, you have the menu bar along the top and then the dock. That's where the significant difference is going to happen. So there's a lot of similarities here where you have a start menu in quotation marks, you have your taskbar, and it's laid out almost identical.
I agree with you there. The argument from the beginning was,
So what makes Windows more user-friendly in that regard?
I never even said that.
Yes, you did.
My argument here
You said
was,
that Linux is not user-friendly.
No,
and so
I
I've been comparing it to Windows this entire time.
I did not say it's not user-friendly. I said it's not as user-intuitive here because it doesn't provide as much feedback as what the other OSs provide.
What feedback does Windows provide that Linux doesn't? In my example.
To do what task?
Well,
To
let's
do
say
what?
open
Anything.
a browser. What does Windows tell you as far as opening a browser? It's not called Internet Explorer anymore. It's called Edge.
I'm aware of that.
Yeah.
Go in to...
So what's the difference between blank slate, this user who knows nothing? There's Edge, there's Firefox, there's Safari. What's the difference?
Okay, let me say this too. I think we've all been giving an unfair criteria here in using and all using an example of, okay, take a user who's unfamiliar with anything. That I think we need to scratch that from this whole thing, because let's be honest, anybody who's using a computer in the United States right now is familiar with a platform over other platforms.
Yeah.
I mean, can we agree on that? Like
Yeah,
that is kind
Yes.
of an absurd criteria to have as part of this. Everyone is going to have a familiarity with one over the other. Just point blank.
Yeah.
Like I would implore you to show me an individual in this country who has literally never seen one of these three operating systems before. I would implore
outside of very specific.
I know they exist. I know they exist,
very specific
listeners.
groups
I
of
know they're
people
out
do.
there, but just I would like you to show me one.
But just to provide Matthew some feedback of at least the one thing Windows does better than I've experienced on Linux is when something is not going right or you make an interaction on the machine, what does Windows do more than almost any other
The
OS out there?
troubleshooter is worthless.
I'm not saying the troubleshooter. What does it do more than any other OS, at least I have experience with? It makes sounds at you for things that you interact with.
That's a fair point.
It makes positive sounds. It makes negative sounds, chimes. When you, I don't know, misclick or you freeze the OS or something doesn't interact the way it's supposed to, what does it do? It makes a
Literally
sound.
everything does that.
Not everything. A lot of
Windows does make the most.
yeah. Not
But
every.
I have to agree with them on that. As far as volume or
when you're
different unique sounds for different situations,
when you're
it makes
trying
more.
to guide a user to be successful in whatever they're attempting to do on the machine, what feedback does the machine give the user to be successful?
All Mac does is it shakes the icon at you, and it's like
Well, the Mac will shake the icon. There's some sounds on a Mac, but on
is.
What-
specifically Ubuntu and Debian, there are a lot of sounds that it gives you. There's a negative sound, there's a positive sound. Just what you're describing here.
there's
That's
like
not,
three different negative
But
sounds.
if
in
you have a
Windows.
user that doesn't have enough experience with a computer, the sounds aren't going to mean anything to them.
they mean they mean
No,
a
it
lot.
means a lot actually.
Yeah,
Subconsciously, it does actually mean
it's
a
audible
lot.
feedback.
Yes.
It's audible feedback, but there's just it's a nudge. It's not there's a pop-up here that says, "Hey, you did something stupid. Would
Sometimes
you
there
like to fix
is.
this?"
Occasion. That's the entire point.
Now,
of
what
the
Mac does
error
better
screen
than
is.
the others is condescendingly ask you, "Are you sure?"
That's completely fair.
So Windows does some of that. I was going to say that Windows. That's one of the other things that Windows does is it condescendingly asks you, "Are you sure?" But not nearly to the degree that Mac OS does. But yeah, no, there are visual cues and there are audible cues, and that's like I don't know what all of those there are in Linux. I can't speak to that at all. But just for your question, there's not just you knowing the right and wrong thing to do. There is, if you do it wrong, there's an audible cue, and there may or may not be an additional visual cue that says you done it wrong.
So here's something else that I think that should also be noted here. When it comes to learning about the platform, both Windows and Mac OS have a significant advantage because there is only one effectively for the workstation. We're just going to say the workstation. We're not talking servers. For the workstation, there is one current version of Windows. There is one current version of macOS. Yes, there are older versions that can be used. There's a couple of older versions you can use, like one for Windows. There's a couple more on the Mac side of things.
To simplify it, yes, I
But
completely agree.
so because there's that, it is very easy, and they also build off of each other.
Hold.
So it's very easy to create.
Hold the line, Matthew.
It's very easy to create educational information. It's also because these are both for profit.
Yeah.
There are companies behind making extensive documentation. When it comes to the Linux side of things, if you want to learn about the core file system, if you want to learn about the administration of it, there's also tons and tons of excellent documentation out there. However, if you're trying to do something from a basic end user, in all of the distros that I have ever touched, it is you run into one of two issues. One is there's not a lot of documentation there because frankly a lot of that is created by volunteers. Or B, it can be wrong. I cannot tell you how often I was trying to figure out something on Linux and it took me forever to find the right Substack or the right Stack Overflow article that had what I needed. And frankly, half the time I never finished because I got tired after an hour or two of digging before I ever found what I wanted.
Which has been a similar experience as I use, so Windows is my daily driver OS, but I consistently jump over to multiple different distros inside of Linux. And my biggest problem I always have with that initial move over, okay, let's go start doing in there, is just the simple, most basic of, oh, this is just kind of how the initial navigation, don't worry about that. It's switching your brain from going, this is how I operate in Windows, this is how I operate now in Linux, from some file navigation, doing basic, like, well, I'm typically, when I'm in there, I'm doing development-based stuff, so switching the brain from PowerShell now to whatever I'm trying to write over here inside of, on the Linux end, or working inside of Docker, things of that nature. They are two different animals that fit two different purposes. Well, you can be OS agnostic, and that's perfectly fine. You can have your preference, and that's perfectly fine. But the big key takeaway from this entire thing, which is the big takeaway from most any type of learning experience, is just read the freaking manual at this point.
If you can find it.
If you can find it. Windows, I'd say just type in Google what you're wanting to do, and eventually you're going to find some, especially if it's a very obscure issue, bless those old Pakistani or Indian individuals who have made a YouTube video back in 2007 using the notepad explaining exactly what they're doing with a very crappy screen cap. You guys, you're the real heroes in this conversation. Don't shake your head, Matthew, because you know that I'm not wrong at all.
I really haven't had any luck with the notepad tutorials.
Really? I have like fixed so many random things from people who have made those types of videos, like I will shake their hand every time. They may have took way too long playing the exact same
Just
song
make it
on
an
loop.
article with screenshots at that point. Or GIFs.
But then how would that
But then
support their YouTube channel?
how would you find it?
By Google.
Yes, how is Google going to promote that one, especially now with Google's own AI now pulling everything by default from Reddit to start, which that has never backfired.
Oh, really?
That's
They're
a
playing.
whole
They're
nother
wow.
conversation, right?
That's
Yeah,
we're
no.
holding that. That's another episode.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's a different episode. We'll get into how that LLM is pulling its information. It's the most amazing thing right now. Anyway, at the end of the day, whatever OS you choose, you're wrong. Is that the takeaway?
Yeah, I think that's about accurate.
All right. Steven, any closing remarks? Matthew,
No, I'm good.
you're happy?
For the most part. I think anybody that uses Microsoft can do better. But
To
That's
be
just me.
fair, Microsoft can do better. And to be fair, so can all of the tuxedo people. Because again, what is the biggest thing stopping Linux from being popular? Or at least being the massive market share?
too many distros.
and the Linux users themselves.
Well, also, and it is very much it's an engineer first, UI second, and those are two very different skill sets. They're very different skill sets.
I would like to see you guys. I will set up a blank install, and I would like to see.
But
you
we're
guys,
we're a
We're a bad example.
You're a very
I
bad
can figure it
example.
out.
We're a
because-
bad-
because
we're-
what you
no.
guys are describing is
No,
that this
I
is just
think-
going to be a nightmare.
I've been your host, John Jones, here today by
Nathan.
Matthew.
Stephen.
Nathan. Where can the people find us?
That is an excellent question. Where can they find us?
You can find us on X and Twitter at HITM Show. Also on Instagram and Facebook at Hostility in the Morning. All one thing, no spaces. HostilityInTheMorning.substack.com. All of these things can be found on HostilityInTheMorning.com. We got links to everything there, as well as our YouTube page at you search Hostility in the Morning.
Nathan, that was a very good impression of Steven. Like,
Thank
good
you.
job.
Thank you.
And everyone else, have a hostile morning. Promo West, the easiest of them all.
Get out.